Okay, well, today I open my paper with the first folio of a 15th century manuscript of Thomas Hoccleve's Regiment of Princes from Cambridge University Library, MSHH 411. A scroll entwined with the first initial that opens the poem judiciously declares, "Beware, study not too sore." This text scroll, or banderole, welcomes the reader into the poem with a paradoxical instruction that both invites interaction and discourages attention. As a marginal decoration, it invites us to question the role of the physical codex in shaping and directing our understanding of the poem. An astonishing 43 manuscripts of Hoccleve's Regiment survive, ranging in date from the second decade of the 15th to the turn of the 16th century. Kathleen Scott lists Hoccleve as one of the main relevant authors of this period whose works came to be illustrated, and these manuscripts are replete with flourished pen strokes, decorated catchwords, three-quarter bar borders with spray work and miniatures. Amongst the collection survives an often overlooked manuscript, MSHH 411, a complete single-text codex of Hoccleve's Regiment that is profusely illustrated with decorated borders featuring banderoles. However, only a handful of scholars have recognized it in passing, often rejecting it for its amateur limnership and discarding it from lists of important regiment manuscripts. Yet it is the only recorded manuscript of the regiment that contains banderoles, ribbon-like scrolls bearing inscriptions that are incorporated into borders and historiated initials. Their presence in the manuscript offers a new interpretation of Hoccleve's most influential work. As a visual means of conveying the spoken word, they represent an intersection of image and text. The banderoles are legitimized and authorized by their proximity to the poem and reflect the ways the physical codex directed understanding. I'm indebted to the team at Cambridge University Library and to Professor Daniel Wakelin at Oxford for enabling me to view this manuscript in the midst of the pandemic. This paper today will focus on these banderoles and their interaction with both the reader and text, exploring how they shape the experience of reading. It will approach the manuscript through an interdisciplinary lens, addressing issues of artistic illustration, codicology, and literary analysis. Firstly, I will briefly look at the decorative borders to suggest a collaborative process between limners. Secondly, I will explore the scroll's codological presence as a critical apparatus to reveal the hierarchy they create within the poem. And lastly, I will focus on the literary impact of the banderoles and the voice they bring to the text, to argue that they form connections between the pages of the poem and draw conceptual threads that inspire a nonlinear reading. Firstly, a brief introduction to the manuscript. HH 411 is a single text manuscript attributed to the 15th century, located in Cambridge University Library, and it has never been edited. The manuscript contains 16 leaves decorated with borders, 14 of which feature banderoles containing proverbs. They are styled as trellis borders comprising a single bar frame adorned with vines, flowers, comic creatures, human figures, heraldry, and scrolls, in a color palette of muted pastel tones. Every scroll contains text, and with a small margin for error, the text fits snugly within the space of the banderole, implying the content was planned before the borders were designed. The border illustrations initially appear crude and unprofessional, outlined in a thick and uneven black ink. Sonia Drimmer theorizes that the downmarket profile of the manuscript is responsible for its relative obscurity amongst the regiment's manuscript corpus, describing it as a scruffy, mixed paper and parchment manuscript. However, upon closer observation, the underlying sketch in a fine brown ink is skillful and delicate, most evident in the faces and the hands of the human characters. Furthermore, the design of the banderoles themselves is masterful, elaborately curling around vines and draped over characters with an emphasis on their three-dimensionality. In contrast, the colored inks applied on top are more amateurish, characterized by a lack of attention to detail. As these images show, there are frequent sections of the border background that are left blank and areas of color that lack an outline. The discrepancy in skill and quality suggests the border decoration may be the result of a collaborative process. Regarding the structure of the limner's workshop, J.J.R. Alexander suggests the study of the distribution of hands within individual manuscripts and the changing patterns of an illustration across manuscripts is suggestive of collaboration amongst limners. In a detailed survey of European manuscript illumination, he proposes that after a skilled limner has inked the details of the design, a less skilled, potentially an apprentice, limner could then add the color washes on top. Considering the discrepancy in style seen in HH 411, I suggest these borders are the result of such a collaboration between a skilled limner and a less professional individual, possibly an apprentice. Juliet Fleming has discussed the interior architecture that articulates the division of texts, a term she expands to include decorative elements in manuscripts that begin, end, run alongside of, and enclose a wide variety of textual units. It has been well established that borders were employed to suggest the structure of a text, and specifically that the introductory page tends to be marked by the most elaborate band or trellis. Within this tradition, decorated borders were frequently employed as finding aids. Larger ornamental features functioned as a quick flip-through method of locating parts and divisions of the text. The decorated borders and banderoles of HH 411 can be understood within this framework. The presence of banderoles increases this effect by associating different sections of the text with short, pithy proverbs, making it easier for a reader to locate a section from memory. Within the interior architecture of the codex, the banderoles also hold a literary purpose by creating a hierarchy within the poem. In her study of later Gothic manuscripts, Kathleen Scott explores the hierarchy of borders and concludes that a three-sided border is of lesser status than the full. HH 411's borders are relatively consistent in style, curving around the page on three sides throughout the codex. At times, the vines and banderoles stray up the margins and intrude into the blank space, but only on one occasion do we find a complete four-sided border. Contrary to expectation, this is not on the first folio, but instead on folio 36R, when the speaker and the old man part ways and the words of the compiler to the prince begin. Considering modern editions of the Regiment mark the clearest point of division at the start of the whole poem, this appears to be an unusual location for the most complete border in the codex. Folio 36R features an elaborate trellis wound with vines and flowers on all four sides, with three banderoles entwined around the base and up the gutter. On the right bar frame, the border is drawn so close to the text that the words overlap the foliage. Yet the border continues, stubborn and uninterrupted, forming the only four-sided border in the manuscript. The banderole at the foot of the page ironically remarks, "When you beginnest a thing, think on the ending," as if the collision of text and border is a mere mistake to be mocked. Yet considering the borders would have been drawn after the text had been copied, why was the limner so determined to construct a four-sided border rather than a three-sided border which would leave a gap for the text? An answer may lie with the manuscript context. When other illustrated manuscripts of Hoccleve's Regiment are consulted, it becomes apparent that HH 411 is not the only manuscript to place a major division at this point. British Library Royal MS 17 D6 and MS Arundel 38 reveal their largest and most elaborate miniatures at the start of the works of the compiler, clearly marking this as the main division of the codex. And I'm sure there are other manuscripts, but due to the past year, I couldn't get my hands on them. Following Scott's hierarchy of borders, I suggest the four-sided border of folio 36R demonstrates the prestige of this section of the poem, and that the apparent clumsiness and overlapping border and text was necessary to the poem's division. It highlights the importance of this section and the playfulness of the banderoles, and rearranges our modern understanding of the text. Ironically, it implies that, at this crucial point of division, form becomes more important than content. The act of reading is overshadowed by the act of looking. Whilst the banderoles elevate the decorative borders on an artistic level, they also influence the flow of the poem. When acknowledged, the banderoles of HH 411 are an active participant in the reading process and shape the way we interact with the poem. Their presence has two key effects. They make the reading experience active by encouraging engagement with the physical codex, and they interrupt the reader's fluency to suggest a nonlinear reading. Fleming notes in her study of printed flowers that marginal decoration turns the printed page into an aesthetic space that encourages projected behavior. The mere presence of decoration creates a space for potential interaction and interpretation. Yet within these decorative borders, banderoles uniquely encourage interaction with the manuscript to make its reading active. In creating a decorative element which is designed to be read, the borders invite attention by drawing the eye to the bright colors and artistically draped scrollwork. The limner has positioned the banderoles in all corners of the page, in a variety of orientations, at times even upside down. The direction of the text follows the spiraling of the scrollwork, emphasizing the fluidity and elegance of the shapes, and is written in such a way that the reader must either turn their head or the codex to read the vertical writing. The size of the manuscript itself, able to be held in both hands, makes this possible. The most interesting instance of this interaction between reader and codex occurs on folio 58R. The banderole judiciously declares, "When thou beginnest anything, think upon the ending," a proverb that is repeated throughout the poem. Yet it is the positioning and the draping of this banderole that makes it stand out. Split into 3 sections, this message is written from bottom to top, starting at the historiated initial and concluding at the top of the page. Located in the top gutter of the leaf, it is the first thing the eye encounters on the page, and therefore the eye must first travel over the ending of the scroll, befittingly the word ending, before finding the start of the scroll below. Furthermore, as the banderole winds up the page, the words invert, writing the final ending upside down. This is a witty instance of the banderole's form matching its content. When asked to think on the end, not only does the reader have to read the scroll from bottom to top, but the last word itself is upside down. The second way in which the manuscript's banderoles impact the flow of the poem is by interrupting linear reading. Whilst marginal decorations serve to rest the eye, the presence of banderoles in these borders amplifies this effect by inviting the reader's attention in a more demanding sense. Although the banderoles are largely passive, inhabiting the margins of the page and the reader's attention, upon occasion they appear to be strategically placed on the page to interrupt the reading flow and intrude into the poem with witty proverbs. Folio 10R is an excellent example of this interruption. In the midst of the old man's complaint of courtiers' wasteful clothing habits, the banderole interjects with the proverb, "Mercy passeth all virtuous things." Positioned at the bottom of the leaf, it is ideally placed to be read when the eye reaches the end of the last line. Whilst the proverb itself supports the old man's message, its location at the foot of the leaf prompts it to be read directly after a line that describes the speaker's financial struggles. This manuscript uniquely imposes this proverb onto the poem at this specific moment and interrupt the reader's linear flow with a message that enhances the morality of the text. A similar effect is seen on folio 36R. Here, the first banderole is located in the top left gutter and positioned directly before the start of the text. Placed where the eye naturally falls when starting a new page, this scroll interjects with an imperative proverb, "Say truth, be not false." This banderole also supports the message of the extract. It follows the old man's suggestion to the speaker to write to his prince and confess his poverty. In this instance, the proverb acts as both a message to the subject to be truthful in his writing and as a moral instruction to the reader. Its location at the top of the page interrupts a section of dialogue and, for a split second, draws the reader out of the poem to consider a larger moral issue. Yet beyond intruding into specific moments of the poem, a further way these banderoles interrupt linear reading is through their repetition of proverbs throughout the codex. When considered in conjunction, repeated border schemes highlight the identity of the codex as something more than the sum of its parts. Michael Camille builds upon this theory in his study of the margins of medieval art, noting that marginal motifs not only reference the text, but also one another. Considered through this framework as a textual unit, the repeated banderole proverbs gain a new meaning, creating a pattern which draws connections between different parts of the poem. There are 2 instances that demonstrate this practice. Folios 21R and 78V share the same proverb, "In welle or wealth, be wad or thou be woe." On folio 21R, this banderole appears at the start of the old man's tale of the King of Sicily, who is wary with his riches and acknowledges that fortunes can change. In this instance, the banderole summarizes the poem's message with a pithy imperative warning. When the same proverb appears on folio 78V, it accompanies the story of avarice, who hoards wealth and is unwilling to give to the poor. By placing the same proverb on these leaves, the manuscript encourages the reader to draw connections between these examples. Whilst the King of Sicily clearly follows the speaker's advice and is mindful of his wealth, avarice is a perfect opposite. And the banderole's union of the extracts encourages the reader to reflect on the passage and the overarching principles of posterity. The second instance is seen on folios 44R and 72V, which both feature the proverb, "Say the best and bear thee soft, untaught tongues grievous oft." On folio 44R, the banderole appears at the start of a section where the speaker advertises the value of counsel, stating that it is a man's duty to correct and amend the wicked deeds of his brothers. The following verses warn against favil and his untrustworthy, polished speech. The banderole's proverb is well located in this passage and mirrors the poem's message. When this proverb appears on folio 72V, it is located at the start of a section where the speaker advises the prince to be generous to his court and give what he can afford. The proverb at first appears to bear little relevance to this passage, but when the previous use is considered, it reveals a bigger picture. The banderoles here link two aspects of courtly life, the receiving of counsel and the giving of gifts. These represent the cycle of the court and the balance necessary to maintain a healthy and lucrative kingdom. This is a message that Hoccleve emphasizes throughout the poem, often ending sections by declaring the need for balance and moderation. In drawing a thread between these two sections, the manuscript encourages reflection on this overarching framework and the poem's greater meanings. As an intersection of image and text, these banderoles uniquely convey methods of transmission and reception, highlighting the importance of the physical page in the reading experience. The visual imprint of their shape is crucial to their content, as something simultaneously pleasing to the eye and theoretically functional. On a structural level, the banderoles of HH 411 provide an interior architecture that creates a hierarchy within both the poem and codex. On a material level, they make reading active, encouraging nonlinear interaction with the physical codex. And on a literary level, they provide proverbial messages that work in tangent with the poem to highlight significant extracts of Hoccleve's instructions and draw links between them. However, it is important to recognize that the marginality of these banderoles does not demand the reader's attention, nor do their decorated borders. The banderoles inhabit a space, one could say a threshold, where they are both designed to be noticed and overlooked. Readers are invited to read them rather than required to. The possibility of being guided by the banderoles, without the obligation to heed them, adds to their playful nature. Whilst their marginality to the text reflects their passivity as invitations rather than obligations, if they are heeded, their contents and placement elevate the reading experience of the text. As an individual case study, this paper does not attempt to comment on the wider conceptual use of banderoles in manuscript contexts, nor on HH 411's relationship with Hoccleve and his canon. Rather, it intends to reveal the unusual and exceptional features of this individual manuscript, to explore its localized use of banderoles. Every manuscript is interesting as a relic of human creativity, and these banderoles remind us that, amidst the mastery of Hoccleve's work, the physical page is a thing of beauty, as both a work of literary and visual art. Yet in HH 411, we find a unique emphasis on the relationship between reader and codex that prompts us to consider Hoccleve's poem from a fresh perspective. This manuscript sits within a larger regiment tradition as evidence of reception and response, prompting the reader to turn inward towards the poem and become more attentive to its meanings. However, the proverbial content and participation in the act of reading also invite the reader to turn outwards to reflect on the larger moral issues of the poem. Thank you for listening.